Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Zach is Cinema. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. If you're finding me for the first time or have been keeping up with me in the channel on our beautiful and lovely Insidious franchise review series, the entire beautiful series has been leading to this very moment. Today, guys, we are going to stop and rank all 6 Insidious films within this franchise, ranking them from my opinion, from the worst in the franchise all the way up to the very best. So without further ado, let's start ranking and let's just start jumping into it. Coming in at number 6 in my opinion is Insidious: The Last Key. Now, this was obviously a very disappointing movie for me. After years after the third one, I didn't think we would ever get another film in this franchise, and this was actually the very first Insidious movie that I saw in theaters, and wow, what an incredibly disappointing experience. But with The Last Key, Elise is really the reason this movie is even watchable, in my opinion. After the first couple movies, it is established that Elise is arguably the franchise's strongest and most interesting character, and I actually like the decision to finally make her front and center for a film just for Elise here. And I actually like the childhood material and the childhood angle this movie gives us to explore that trauma, family dynamic, and supernatural experiences that shaped her. It makes this prequel at least feel a little bit more justified than it probably should, because we hadn't had a Elise-centered story within this franchise just yet. And beyond the mess of this movie, there are some pretty good ideas buried in here. I love the key finger and key face design of the demon and the idea behind the demon manipulating people that have been connected to Elise's childhood home and implied that he's been doing this for generations. And the childhood storyline with Elise and her mother, her brother, and her father in the first 15 minutes is a really interesting family story that unfortunately goes nowhere. The problem is that this movie constantly introduces ideas that could be fascinating, but either resolves them in the easiest way possible, or does it in a very convenient way, or just drops the idea altogether. And the biggest problem with this movie, the reason it's in last place, is because it's not scary enough to be an Insidious film. The jump scares rarely have the tension or atmosphere that the earlier movies had, and the movie is missing a score altogether. It is missing that haunting score that feels so important to this franchise's identity, and by the halfway point, it feels less like a supernatural horror movie and more like a mediocre mystery with demons sprinkled throughout. And on top of that, the mythology becomes way too convenient and messy. Elise suddenly has answers that she shouldn't reasonably have just by touching items and objects. The key finger demon's plan doesn't really make any sense. The rules of the further are continuing to become more flexible and convenient, and the movie relies heavily on exposition rather than letting the mystery slowly unravel in a natural way. And it also doesn't help that Tucker and Specs are the worst aspect of this movie, almost entirely used as comic relief, which makes any side of this investigative story hard to take serious or difficult to really stay invested in. And ultimately, this movie wastes its best ideas, why it easily lands in number 6 for me. Elise's relationship with her father, the history of the house, the key finger demon, the connections to the first Insidious film that feel like bullshit in here, the potential to give this franchise something meaningful and fresh with Elise being our main character, they really waste all of it, because instead most of these ideas feel rushed or convenient or completely undercut by the lame and forgettable third act, leaving me with a movie that appreciate more of what it could have and should have been rather than what it actually turned out to be. So for me, easily in number 6, because it's the most forgettable film in this franchise, is Insidious: The Last Key. But coming in at my number 5 spot, I have Insidious: The Red Door. Now, I was beyond hyped and excited for this film. The second one that I got to see in the theaters, but we were returning back to that Lambert family story, a story we haven't continued since the second Insidious film. And these films being a big part of my childhood, Patrick Wilson coming to direct for his first time ever, I was beyond excited and after I watched it, beyond disappointed. But with that said, the Lambert family story is easily the best part of this film. I really like the idea of jumping forward and showing what happened after Insidious Chapter 2, showing what happened to Dalton and Josh after being forced to forget the events that just occurred and the further altogether. Their relationship is something you're invested in because it is now completely broken. Even though these two characters have so much to bond over. They have saved each other from the further in those first two movies. And the tragic and upsetting part of this film is that they don't remember the strong connection that they should really have. They are so disconnected, which gives their relationship this interesting layer of tragedy that the movie really handles well and sits in very well. And compared to The Last Key, I feel like Patrick Wilson actually brings some much needed atmosphere, tone, and vibes back to this franchise. It feels more like an Insidious film once again. The darker color palette, the depressing tone, the moments of slowly building tension and giving an atmosphere and an emotional, depressing state to these characters, which was the best part of the film for me. And especially with scenes like the car scene with a simple scene of Josh just waiting for Dalton to respond to him over text is the best example of this because it works well as an emotional father-son scene and then also has some scary, creepy, subtle imagery going on in the background. There are flashes of Patrick Wilson here that I really hope to see that he directs another horror film very soon here. But with this first one, it was incredibly disappointing because the movie spends almost 2 fucking hours rediscovering things we already knew. This is one of the most boring movies I have ever sat through. The entire mystery revolves around Josh and Dalton remembering the events of those first 2 films, but there is no mystery for the audience to get behind because we have already experienced those events multiple times by this movie's release date. And once they finally remember, the movie doesn't even spend a lot of time in that element here. They don't do much with that revelation before the third act and then the finale. For a movie that's supposed to conclude the family of the Lambert family, I wanted it to give us something new about the further or new about the mythology, but instead it just seems so focused on revisiting the past that only 2 characters don't know about. And on top of that, the further and the idea of astral projection become way too convenient here and the rules just get way too messy. Dalton can essentially just enter the further just on command. The environment sometimes just becomes a one-to-one version of the real world environment, and the rules seem to just change whenever the story really needs them to, and that kind of takes away a lot of the mystery, danger the further was really effective for in those first couple of films. The original kind of made the astral projection idea kind of terrifying because Dalton didn't even know or understand what was happening to him or that he had these abilities, and he just drifted off in his sleep. And here it is played out more like this superpower, like we're watching an X-Men or Marvel film. And ultimately, I think The Red Door is extremely disappointing, but not entirely a worthless entry. There are some strong ideas here about trauma, family, and choosing to confront painful memories instead of just flat out ignoring them. And Patrick Wilson does a great job with the atmosphere and conveying some of those ideas, but unfortunately, its repetitive story, inconsistent mythology, and lack of memorable or consistent horror and a rushed conclusion keep it from feeling like that satisfying conclusion the Lambert family really deserved here, which is why it comes in at my number 5 spot. But coming in at my number 4 spot, I have Insidious Chapter 2. And as a sequel to that fantastic first one, I actually respect this movie and respect how it actually commits to continuing the first film. The original could have definitely been left as a standalone film and you can watch it as just a one and done, but Chapter 2 immediately picks up on Josh's possession story and Elise's death instead of undoing or doing a one-off spin-off story. And it also takes the mythology in a much bigger direction while also expanding and further going into the further, introducing time travel elements and digging deeper into Josh's childhood, all elements that I really enjoy here. And the horror and atmosphere here is still some of the franchise's strongest suit. The woman in white is one of my favorite designs in the series just because of how creepy it is, how sparingly she's used, how simple it is, especially in those background shots where you suddenly start noticing her just subtly sitting in the distance and sitting in the background, and add in scenes like that tin can telephone sequence with the two brothers, and the movie still has some genuinely creative and creepy scares rather than relying entirely on jump scares, but it also introduces some fantastic jump scares in here as well. And I feel like the first 70% of the movie is a little bit difficult to kind of get into, but it really finds its footing and confidence within the third act. I'm a huge fan of this third act here because up until that point, the first half can kind of feel very scattered because we're following Josh's possession, the Lambert family, we're following Elise's investigation, we're also following Specker, Tucker, and Carl all at once. But once Josh actually goes back and enters the further, those pieces finally start to become somewhat connected. And I especially love how the movie loops back into the first film and reveals that Josh was actually communicating to his younger self all those years back when he originally met Elise. And Dalton is actually entering the further to save his father, creates this great reversal of the first film as well, and kind of reinforces that franchise's strong theme of family, which I felt was very important and really well done here. And Patrick Wilson is a huge standout for me in this film. Watching him completely embrace this unhinged, shining inspired version of Josh is just so much fun to me, and I honestly wish he played more characters just like this. He makes Josh genuinely threatening while still keeping an emotional connection to his family, and it gives the second half an identity that I think this movie really benefits from, and I don't understand people who don't like that direction because I adore that direction. And Chapter 2, I think, is ambitious enough to earn this placement, but doesn't completely stick the landing, and a lot of those middle parts are difficult to kind of get through because the biggest problems here are how convenient the mythology becomes, especially with the astral projection, and I hate the character of Carl and his convenience he introduces to this film, and the elements of just suddenly being able to jump in and out of the further feel really goofy to me. But on top of that, this movie has some great elements like the Parker Crane storyline and elements like that, but then at the same time, the Parker Crane storyline just ends in a anticlimactic sort of way. But at the same time, I still appreciate that this movie actually tries to expand the world instead of just repeating elements from the first film. And overall, I really do enjoy this one because I think it has some strong scares here, some decent performances, mythology, and an emotional family story that continues on from that first one, but then concludes in a satisfying way. So I feel like this one is overhated, kind of slept on, in my opinion, because I have a ton of fun with Insidious Chapter 2 because it's coming in at my number 4 spot. But coming in at number 3, we have the brand new one, Insidious Out of the Further. Now, this one definitely has the most likely to kind of change on my placement. I just watched it and not 100% confident in this placement, but right here I feel comfortable with it right in the middle because this one was honestly a huge surprise to me and a great return to form within the franchise. After the glass key and the red door felt incredibly forgettable. I went into this just kind of expecting more of the same, but it ended up being a really just fun, straightforward Insidious movie that reminded me why I have a lot of fun within this franchise. And a big part of that is it finally brings back that haunted house horror that I adore and love. The movie has some of the franchise's best scares in a while, with creepy imagery, strong tension, creative jump scares, and a sequence like that couch fort sequence that made the further feel much more bigger. It made it feel more dangerous and unpredictable again, which I adored those elements in here. And I love the new mythology and slightly fresh takes in here. I think it is the movie's biggest strengths overall. The introduction of the idea of the couriers, the idea of demons using people to kind of travel between the real world and the further, or between the further and the real world, and Cyrus being this former human cult leader gives this franchise some genuinely fresh ideas instead of simply just repeating the straightforward astral projection storyline. And this movie kind of returns to form with that family story and that family heart. Gemma and her daughter here give this movie its emotional core that it really needed, particularly through the story about Gemma and her relationship with her mother and that cycle of generational trauma. However, at the same time, it's coming in this place because some of that story elements feel predictable. The boyfriend character feels unnecessary, and by this point, Elise kind of feels more like a writing convenience than she does a character. And I think the biggest thing holding this back is its rushed and convenient ending. Gemma here is a decent character, but she suddenly gains this incredible amount of control over her abilities, and it feels like the story needed something else rather than just rushing that climax, which kind of keeps it from reaching the levels of some of the peak movies within this franchise. But a decent return to form. This movie was way, way better than it deserved to be or that I expected. So I'm happy to say that Insidious Out of the Further comes in at my number 3 spot. But coming in at number 2, I have Insidious Chapter 3. And I really liked the fresh and new direction this movie took, especially at its time. After the first 2 movies wrapped up the Lambert family story, going back and making Elise one of the primary main characters here feels like a very natural way to continue this franchise by doing prequels instead of direct sequels. And Elise is one of the strongest, most interesting characters to me. I love and adore Elise, so giving her a prequel that kind of goes into her relationship with the further and just gives us a standalone story with her makes way more sense than revisiting the Lambert story at this time. And Elise here is such a strong character that I wish the franchise had done more with her backstory, especially with her relationship with her husband, like her connection to the further in that story with her husband. I kind of wish I'd seen that movie, but it does introduce some strong elements here, especially with her connection with the woman in black, which also elevates the first movie even more and makes that ending even more tragic now that you know the woman in black has been hunting her down for decades before that first one. And putting her front and center here, even though she's not the main character, she is one of our main characters. It feels like we're expanding a little bit more in this franchise rather than just repeating, and that's a huge positive here. And a big reason this lands at number 2 is because it gave us the potential and showcased the talent of Lee Winnell, and it actually brings a lot of horror and scares here and pushes that PG-13 rating. This has some of the best scares in the franchise, especially that video chat sequence, the visual experience of the old man demon just slowly appearing in the background, and his visual look of the man who can't breathe, Elise discovering him hanging like a fucking bat in her basement in the ceiling, and some of the most disturbing visuals involving some of our characters and the character of Quinn. What I appreciate most is that the the scares aren't just loud jump scares, but they are, but then at the same time, they introduce and build a lot of tension here and anticipation before the payoff. Compared to some of the later movies, Chapter 3 still understands that surrounding your scares around the atmosphere is what's most important and what actually makes it pretty effective. And this is a movie that kind of sticks with you after you watch it. The old man demon is a very effective and creepy design. The woman in black gets reintroduced and reintroduced with some much needed additional detail and mythology here. There are moments where it genuinely gets weird and disturbing in a way that I really enjoy. And Chapter 3 has a stronger horror identity rather than some of those later films in the franchise here. But unfortunately, it falls short of my number one spot because Elise is a main character in here, but she is surrounded by so much other stuff that I wish that stuff was just as interesting as the Elise story, because Quinn is fine, but I never really became invested in her or the family, especially compared to the Lamberts or Elise altogether. The dialogue and some of the acting, especially in the beginning, can be pretty rough to get through, and the third act feels rushed and familiar at times, basically repeating the someone is trapped in the further and someone has to go save them formula. I still really like Chapter 3, but I wish it kind of blended elements from Chapter 3 and The Last Key and had gone all in on that Elise storyline, because I think a full, well done story centered around Elise could be one of the best movies within this franchise here, but they kind of do a half measure of that. So that is why Insidious Chapter 3 comes in at my number 2 spot. But coming in at my number 1 spot, we have the original, of course, Insidious. And to me, the original movie is what best defines this franchise as being very special. It takes a familiar haunted house formula and completely flips the script on the audience by showcasing that the haunting isn't haunting the house, it's actually tied to Dalton and a character. From there, the special introduction of the further and astral projection is the first time we've seen something like this and gives this movie a special identity that separates it from other supernatural horror movies while turning something as vulnerable as sleeping as a child into something genuinely terrifying. The atmosphere here and the scares are easily the best in the franchise, and the franchise never gets better than this, in my opinion. I know the loud jump scares and string orchestra instruments and score isn't for everyone, but I think James Wan uses both of these incredibly well. The score creates this constant sense of dread to me. The movie is filled with subtle, creepy details before the loud scares even get in your face, and the sequences like the red-faced demon, how he pops up in his third act reveal, still work to me because of how well they're built up rather than relying on just cheap jump scares. It utilizes both very effectively here. And the further is this fantastic concept that really elevates this film for me, that dark, endless realm with disturbing spirits, the red-faced demons layer, and the idea that Josh and Dalton can travel into and out of this place creates a mythology that feels genuinely unique for when it came out and still feels unique to this day. And even though I wish the actual search for Dalton in the further was a little bit longer and more played out, I love how much the third act embraces this world rather than just giving us this standard haunted house finale. And what keeps this movie emotionally grounded to me is that supernatural story is ultimately about a father trying to connect and save his son. Josh's history with astral projection and the further gives this story this personal connection that makes the climax way more meaningful to me, because he's not just fighting some random demon, he's confronting something that followed him and took his childhood away and is now taking his son's childhood away. And that's what makes Insidious more than a collection of creepy imageries and jump scares to me, is because the story is captivating and very well done. And ultimately, I adore this movie's ending and climax. Josh succeeds in saving Dalton, but the victory comes with this enormous cost when the entity finally possesses him, and Elise realizes the truth just moments and seconds away before she is murdered by that entity. It is completely shocking, tragic, and leaves the entire story on this dark note that I really wonder how this franchise would be viewed if this was just a one and done film, because nothing else in this franchise has matched the originality, atmosphere, mythology, and emotional story and devastating ending that is the original Insidious film. So that is why it easily comes in at my number one spot. So you guys have my official Zach is Cinema Insidious franchise ranking from worst to best. This has been a ton of fun. I adored revisiting this franchise, but most importantly, please down below, let me know your personal ranking of the franchise that is Insidious. My ranking is not the universal ranking, but let me know yours down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings down below here, but that's about it. You guys have my completed Insidious thoughts here. Let me know your thoughts and feelings down below, but that's about it. I appreciate anybody watching my videos, so thank you so much. It means so much to me, so thanks again. And yeah, look forward to more Zeka Cinema coming very soon.